Hello and welcome to A Palace for the People. I am Angela Washuka.
And I'm Wanjuro Koinange.
This season, we're focusing on the theme of protest. And in today's episode, we're going way back in time with our intern, Faith Kimutai.
I wanted to find the first ever protest or the first organized protest.
Okay, so how far do we have to go back to find that?
So, it turns out trying to find the first protest is kind of difficult because Kenyans have been protesting for so long. In our last episode, our guest, Keith Angana, brought up Wayaki Wahinga and his fight with the Imperial British East Africa Company, and that was back in the late 1800s, for example. But then, when I was doing my research, I became interested in a certain kind of protest, a kind of protest that's been around, according to scholars, since way before the 1800s. Since 1157 BC to be exact, when a group of artisans in ancient Egypt put down their tools in response to late wage rations. I'm talking about strikes.
Several secondary schools have sent learners back home as the teacher strike called by Kupet enters its second week.
Facing them were 700 policemen in full riot gear, with another 500 waiting close.
The energy which fired the Durban strikers was the energy of despair.
Teachers across Queensland have today walked off the job for the first time in 16
Mass picketing
years.
continues in the Hollywood film strike. Despite restraining orders, pickets still jam the streets, and in 2 days, more than 800 are removed to jail.
We want to make sure that every customer gets their packages, but we also need what we deserve.
Teamsters Union. And we go now to Brazil, where public sector workers started a national strike against President Jair Bolsonaro's policy.
Mombasa dock workers are now demanding an explanation for the aborted AGM that was slated for today. The members are accusing the current leadership.
In this episode of A Palace for the People, we are going back to the start of Kenya's labor movement. So we want to start right at the beginning. What will you consider to be the start of the Kenyan labor movement?
The labor movement, it starts when there is a labor class in Kenya. And the class started with the railways. So the start of the whole program starts with the building of the railways in Kenya going to Uganda.
This is Shiraz Durrani.
Okay, my name is Shiraz Durrani. I'm from Kenya. I'm a Kenyan, as far as I know, unless the government decides otherwise.
Shiraz has written extensively on Kenya's labor history, which, as he said, really began with the building of the railway.
And it's interesting that just a few years after the railway started building, the workers organized and started going on strike. And the first strike was in 1900.
We've spoken about the railway before on this podcast. You know, we had an episode about the history of Nairobi, how the city and its planning was central to this railway. And it never fails to surprise me how this one piece of infrastructure has influenced so much of our history. In order to build the railway, the British settlers brought just over 30,000 Indian indentured workers to Kenya, as well as many quote-unquote specialists from Britain.
So, and then again, another interesting point was at that stage, there was not that apartheid system yet, not fully entrenched. So, some of the strikes involved European workers as well. And this is also another indication of a kind of a hidden fact that among the white settlers, there were classes also.
But that solidarity didn't last. By the 1910s, the British had begun dividing workers along racial lines: Indian, African, European, keeping them separate, disorganized, and easier to control. That made it harder, but it didn't stop worker organizations. In 1914, the Indian Trade Union formed in Mombasa. In 1919, the Workers' Federation of British East Africa was created, mostly for white workers. And then, in the 1920s, something shifted. The East African Association was formed, a group explicitly open to everyone. Its chair was Harry Thuku, one of the earliest nationalists.
British colonialism didn't want workers of the whole country to be united. So they kept them in compartments. But the East African Association was specifically stated that it is open to all nationalities of Kenya.
Next, the Indian Trade Union changed its name to the Labour Trade Union of Kenya and began to organize across racial lines, something the British disapproved of a lot. And at this trade union, chief among its organizers was a young radical named Makan Singh.
He was known to the British government as a troublemaker, as they would call him. 1935, as you saw, he was elected Secretary of the Indian Trade Union. And then he influenced the Indian Trade Union to change to Labour Trade Union of Kenya, to open its doors to workers, irrespective of race, religion and color. And you need to think in terms of the situation at the time in Kenya. It was almost like apartheid South Africa. And yet here is a union talking about bringing everybody together.
Despite being one of Kenya's most important labor organizers, Makan Singh wasn't born in Kenya. He arrived from India in 1927. He was just 14 years old.
He worked in a printing press which was run by his father. So he got experience of printing and in working class struggles there.
And he quickly became a central figure in the Kenyan movement. Then came 1936. Makan Singh and the Labour Trade Union of Kenya organized one of the longest strikes in the region's history. Imagine this. It's April 1937. Hundreds of workers in Kenya stop work. They demand two things: a small salary increase and something unheard of at the time, an 8-hour workday.
Now, previous to this, workers could be asked to work anytime. There was no limit in the number of hours. And this is the first time that this demand was made.
The strike lasted 62 days. It shook the British settlers. Workers had never held out that long, and they won.
And they succeeded in that. And they got some increment, not exactly what they'd asked for, but quite a bit.
But maybe the bigger victory was psychological. Kenyan workers had tasted collective power. Makan Singh believed trade unions couldn't exist without political struggle.
Cannot have a struggle only on the industrialized side, looking at only increasing workers' pay and so on. That struggle has to be linked with the political struggle. On 23rd March, April 1950, Makan Singh called for complete independence of East Africa at a mass meeting of Kenya African Union and East African Indian National Congress.
A few weeks later, Makan Singh and fellow activist Fred Kubai were arrested.
And that led to a 10-day strike. And the demands were first release Makan Singh, Kubai and Chege Kibachia. And the second demand was a minimum wage of 100 shillings.
These weren't just economic demands. They were revolutionary. And it wasn't long before the Mau Mau uprising began. Shiraz believes that union organizing played a central role in radicalizing the movement.
It was only the trade union movement, because of their class basis, that some of this consciousness, the class awareness, came into Mau Mau. The second was organization. Trade unions were the only organization which was nationwide, which was carried into, it can carry information and had members all along the railway line. They had members in plantations, in industries in Nairobi. So it was the only organization that could get a national consciousness. And when trade unions started going through Mau Mau, this is when Mau Mau became what it was.
So why today is Makan Singh barely known? In the early 1960s, the British knew they couldn't hold Kenya forever. But they weren't ready to give up power completely.
The question was how to transition from colonialism to neocolonialism.
So they backed a transition. one that left many of the more radical independence leaders out in the cold.
They realized the strength of the trade union movement, and laws had to be brought in to stop guys like Makhan Singh coming up and restarting what they had been. Makhan Singh would never have stopped. They had to neutralize him. So they made sure that after independence, he was marginalized. He was not allowed to be involved in politics.
After independence, Singh was barred from holding political office. He was never publicly honored. He retreated to a quiet life of writing and archiving. Meanwhile, the radical labor movement he helped build was dismantled. This is the last episode of this season of A Palace for the People. We've talked to a lot of people about what protests means to them.
It's like we were the freedom fighters. We were not afraid. Like we had enough.
And I said, we are going to present that document to the people of Kenya so that they can adapt it.
This is a script that has been written.
You have to understand that we already didn't trust the student leaders at our school.
They think because this is what we have, then it is what we ought to have in perpetuity.
So farmers have continued to share their seeds as an act of defiance because this is a right that is enshrined in our constitution. I do share my seeds. I have a garden, I have a farm.
I was not apologetic about what we had done or what I had said, and I stood by it. I think the enormity was...
And the reason we started this season was because of the anti-finance bill protests, the so-called Gen Z protests, and Shiraz sees echoes of Kenya's labor leaders in the current protesters.
Like today's Gen Z, those guys said it's about time we change the direction, that this petitioning and crying and asking and pleading and begging doesn't work anymore.
Just a note that we recorded this interview with Shiraz Durrani in December 2024. We thank him and all our guests for their valuable time and insights. This season was brought to you by us, your 2024 Book Bank interns, me, Faith Kibutai, Esther M., Clinton Otieno, Ida Apundi, Enoch Wanyama, Juliet Ndoti, and a special thanks to Maureen Mumboa. We dedicate this season to those that lost their lives protesting for a better Kenya for all.
Thank you as always for listening. This is A Palace for the People. I am Angela Washuka.
And I'm Wanjiro Koinange.
This episode was produced by Ida Holinambi, Maeve Francis, and Faith Kimutai. As always, many thanks to our guests and experts for sharing their knowledge. And special thanks to Maureen Mumbo, who leads our archive department. To donate or support our work, please visit bookbank.org. You can also find learning resources to go along with this episode at bookbank.org/podcast. This podcast is supported by the British Council's Cultural Protection Fund, administered in partnership with the UK's Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport.